A Rare Find by Joanna Lowell. This is the second Joanna Lowell book I've read. Last year I read A Sure Thing, which I also really liked. Spoiler alert, I liked this book too. But A Sure Thing isn't really sapphic. I mostly read sapphic books on this channel. I didn't do my intro because I just didn't feel like it and I forget all the time. But this is hello and welcome to Mostly Sapphic Books, where I mostly read sapphic books. A Sure Thing was not quite sapphic. It was about a trans man who falls in love with a straight woman, presumably. I'm pretty sure if I'm remembering correctly. There were some sapphic side characters. The trans man in that book did at one point identify as a woman and a lesbian, and like had a group of friends who were also women and who were lesbians, and was like part of a society that they had all created. It's a historical book, so it's a society, like old time. I don't know my English historical eras. I just call everything Victorian. I don't know if that book was Victorian. It could have been. I don't know what that means. That book was good, and this is in a very similar vein. You can tell that this is written by the same author. You can tell that it's got like the same sort of voice and style. But this one is about sapphics though. Mostly. There are some gay guys as well, and also one of our main characters is gender non-conforming and actually goes by they, them pronouns, which is really cool for a Regency piece. I know this is Regency because there's an author's note at the end of this book that talked about some of the historical context and some of the inaccuracies that she was intentionally writing because this was the story she wanted to tell. So this is a Regency era England in Derbyshire? Derbyshire. My cat's napping directly in front of the camera. I love that. She's chilling down there. Maybe she's in frame. Okay. This is a very lighthearted, feel-good, historical Regency romance novel about these two not women. One of them is a woman, one of them is uncomfortable being called a woman, but was born a woman and presents as a woman in regular society. In private with her friends, they go by they, them. But it's sapphic enough, like non-binary sapphic. It still feels very sapphic. And there are some side characters who are two women in a relationship who are friends of the non-binary main character. So it's sapphic. This is about two wealthy neighbors. They're sort of warring. They're not at war, but their families sort of resent each other for various reasons. These two love interests grew up alongside each other, but never quite got along, even though they kind of both had secret crushes, but they don't talk about it. It's sort of a, not quite enemies to lovers, but sort of an enemies to lovers, dislike to lovers. That's a phrase I'm hearing more of, I think because people are getting upset over the inaccuracy of an enemies to lovers. They're not enemies. They dislike each other. So our female main character is Elfrida. She is the oldest daughter of an archaeologist. She herself wants to be an archaeologist, but she's a woman, so even her father doesn't take her seriously, even though he has educated her and does teach her about this stuff. But still, like, in the back of his mind, he's like, oh, she's good for a woman, but she's not, you know, up to snuff with the rest of my fellowship and all of us real archaeologists. And her dream is to find proof that these Norsemen from forever ago, I don't know my history. I said that, I'll have to say that again. But she's looking for evidence that there were Norsemen who camped in this area several hundred years ago at some time. She's looking for evidence of the Danes. Of the Horde, is that what it's called? I don't know what she's talking about. I'm American and dumb. And she thinks if she's able to find proof, then that will be her entry into this fellowship in this high society of men who are very serious about history and discovery and archaeology. And she thinks this will be like her big breakthrough into the world of respect in this very male-centered field. And she does find a little necklace that is proof of this, but then she gets knocked into a river by our other main character, Georgie, who is her neighbor, Elfrida's neighbor. They own this other big estate. They're a wealthy landowner. It's really their estate because their brother's kind of in charge, but has sort of left it to them, and their dad is dead, and their mom has vanished. So Georgie is here alone, has returned, has been away in London for 5 years, you know, doing the society thing, and they're an actor. They've been in the theater. They're doing other things. But they've returned, and they're sort of a lighthearted sort of jokester character. They like to have fun. And so, as a joke, they knock Elfrida into the water because they think she's someone else. But she's not. It's Elfrida. And Elfrida loses this necklace, which is like her big proof that she's made this grand discovery. And Elfrida's like, oh, of course Georgie Redmayne is back in town, and they're gonna cause a bunch of trouble and annoy me because they're not serious enough, and you know they've been off gallivanting in London, and they don't care about this area, and they don't care about the history of the land or the countryside. They're just annoying and in the way and bothering me. But Georgie does feel bad because they didn't actually mean to knock Elfrida into the water, and they also didn't mean to cause her to lose her necklace. Elfrida explains the necklace and its importance, and Georgie's like, oh, that's my bad. But they keep bumping into each other, and eventually they end up on a quest to find more evidence, more archaeological findings that prove Elfrida's theory. They're going off of this guidebook that Elfrida's grandmother wrote and like translated from an old text, but her father is like, no, 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 my mother was not a serious archaeologist. This is a novel she was writing. It is all fictional. And Elfrida's like, no, actually, women can be smart. And this is like clearly a text that she was translating that contains clues as to where these Norsemen would have buried their treasure, or like would have camped, and like where we can find evidence that they camped. Georgie is really the only one who believes her. And so the two of them go on a quest to discover these lost artifacts and end up falling in love along the way. I did not explain that very succinctly. I thought this was going to be a very short video because I don't actually have a lot to say in terms of review, which you maybe wouldn't expect out of watching a book review that you clicked on to see a review of a book. I'm sure I'll yap for way longer than I think I will, but I don't think I have a lot to say about this book because I just liked it. If you go into this knowing that it's just a really lighthearted, fun, easygoing, cozy romance read, you'll really enjoy it. That's what I went in knowing this was, expecting this to be. I just had fun. This isn't something you really deeply analyze, but it's also not without depth or merit. I think the plot structuring here is pretty nice. There's a lot of like little details that come back, and like places that come back, and like clues and mentions at the beginning of the novel that help them discover the treasure in the end, you know? I think there's lots of little callbacks. I think there's good character development. I think this is well written. If it was really poorly written, then it wouldn't be fun because you'd just be like, wow, there's so many plot holes and so many character decisions that don't make sense or things like that. So you wouldn't be able to enjoy it. But because it is competent enough, it is a very enjoyable read. You can trust the author to just take you on a fun little story. You can just have a good little time. And I think that's the value of this, and I think that's what the author wanted to accomplish. Again, there's an author's note at the end of this that explained how she, or they, I guess I don't know the author's pronouns. I'm going to assume it's a woman, but I'm just assuming. Okay, the author bio says she. In the author's note at the end, she talks about how historical romances were like the first romances she ever read, and like historical books are just a passion of hers, and she really likes reading them. And so she thought it would be very fun to showcase queer ideas in a historical setting, but she also talks about how historical books aren't just for learning about a time period. They can do that. They can be sort of educational in a way, but they're also very much used as a lens of describing contemporary thoughts and attitudes and how we sort of apply that to the past. Every time a historical book is written in a period that's not the period it takes place in, it says something about the culture in which it is written, and it says something about the modern day. And so, like, she's very aware of that, and she's very aware that some of these ideas, like, maybe wouldn't exactly fly in this era. You definitely couldn't write a book like this in this era, but some of the ideas maybe don't match up with what we expect sort of from this era. But I think that's the point. I really like that this is a lighthearted queer romance. I like that this isn't super heavy. It's not super tragic. Again, the sexism and the homophobia, and the transphobia, and the repression of the times is obviously brought up. That's obviously some part of this novel. but it doesn't dwell on it. We are really in these two characters' viewpoints in their little life that they've been able to carve out for themselves. We don't focus that much, or not too significantly at least, on the oppressive structures around them. Again, we get some. Georgie obviously can't use they them pronouns in just society. That's not really a thing. And the author even talks about how that wasn't really how people necessarily described themselves who were gender nonconforming at the time, but how it's not like impossible, and she just wanted to apply that. So the author's like aware of like what is anachronistic and what isn't, and is intentionally doing what she's doing to tell the story that she wants to tell. And then we see, Elfrida's dad is pretty sexist and, doesn't treat her with the respect he would treat a son. So, like, we get those moments, but it's really focused on the internality of the two main characters rather than the externality and the external parts of their lives and the forces pushing against them. We're just kind of in their heads and, like, in their little bubbles. And they are privileged women. They're wealthy. They own land, or their families own a lot of land. They have tenants. They have money. They're not, like, working a job. They're not stressing about paying the bills. They're not being forced to get married for money. Things like that. So these are characters in a privileged position, and that does help with the lightheartedness of the story, because they do have more independence than a lot of women at this time would have. And that plays into it, but that suits the story that the author wanted to tell. So it works. I like it. I like this perspective. I like these characters. I like this little world, and I like the archaeology aspect. That's a little different twist on a historical piece. I don't read a lot of historical novels. That's not something that interests me. I like queer historical novels. And I think I like queer historical novels like this that are written in a very contemporary day and age and can really be about the queerness and like focus on the queer aspects and the queer characters and explicitly talk about them and their struggles and their happiness, especially the happiness. I like that this is a happy book. And I liked that about A Shore Thing as well. So I really like this author's style. I really like what she's trying to do. I think she accomplishes what she's trying to do. I think she's a good writer. I think it's very competent. If you're reading this like really for plot, there is good plot here, I think, but sometimes you might get upset with the pacing. We're not like totally focused on the plot and like the treasure finding. Sometimes we take a backseat to do other things, and there's other side characters, and there's lots of like fun in this and like little moments that are just comedic or fun. Like Elfrida has 3 little sisters, and they're all like very comedic. She has 2 very young twin sisters who get into a lot of trouble and are very rabble-rousy and annoying, but in a way that's sort of endearing of children. And then she has a younger teenage sister named Agnes, who's like an annoying teenager, like a young teenager. And she's really into Georgie and is always like getting them to like come to her room and like watch her play the flute, or the lute, not the flute. She's always talking about her friend Beatrice back in London who she met, who like isn't writing to her, and I'm pretty sure she's gay for her. That doesn't get totally resolved, I guess, but like I got an inkling that this little kid was also queer and just didn't know it yet, or didn't have the language for that. And then Georgie's got an ex-fiance who's this gay man who like was going to marry her for like a lavender marriage, but Georgie called it off. Didn't want to live that life, wanted to live as openly as possible as who they were with, someone they actually loved. So you've got him, and then he gets like a boyfriend in this, and there's little funny moments. Georgie has an old friend group called the Janes, which were 3 women named Jane, and then another woman who wasn't named Jane, but they just called her a Jane honorarily. So like there's just like funny world building stuff. Just that sort of enlightens these people's lives, or enlivens these people's lives, I'll say. It adds to the lightheartedness, it adds to the cozy feel. I would call this a cozy historical novel. So as long as you're not expecting a lot of drama and a lot of plot and a lot of, like, a ton of stuff about archaeology, there's a good amount of archaeology, but as long as you're not expecting something different than what this actually is, you will enjoy this. If you go in just looking to have a fun, lighthearted time, not think too heavily about it. This is an entertainment read for sure, and that's what the author wants, and the author has accomplished that goal. And I really enjoyed it. I was along for the ride. I liked it. I found parts funny. I found the relationship really charming because Georgie's like a rake, and they're very charming. They're very openly queer as much as they can be. And Elfrida's never been in a relationship, hasn't even considered being in a relationship with a woman or someone who's not a man until she meets the Sapphic side characters that are friends of Georgie, and she catches them kissing, and then she's like, oh. So she gets inducted into this world of queerness, and Georgie brings her along for the ride, and they just have a good time. And they're sort of bickery, and they warm up to each other, and even though they don't want to, they feel the attraction, and then it progresses into a really cute actual love story where these two are really good for each other, and they bring out the best in each other, and they're very supportive of each other, and they realistically can build a life together. Like, they own 2 estates side by side. They're both wealthy women who don't have to get married to, for money or to keep up an image necessarily. They have a lot going for them, and a lot of things work out for them intentionally. That's what the author wants. The author wants this to be a really nice, easygoing romance that really works out. You want the happy ending. You want the love story. And this has that. And I think it's just the book it wants to be. And I really enjoyed it, and I had a good time. 5 stars. I could see someone giving this like a lower 3 or 4 star rating if they were expecting something else, but I think this is a good book, and I recommend it if you're into this historical romance genre, or you're looking for books with like gender non-conforming, non-binary characters in a historical setting especially, because I don't think there's a lot of that. I don't recall reading a lot of that, except The Shore Thing by Joanna Lowell. But I think there's maybe more trans stories than non-binary stories, because I think just the language of the time isn't quite befitting that. But this proves that you can put a non-binary character in that time period. There obviously were people who were gender non-conforming at the time, they just had different language, and it's hard to know how they would have expressed themselves with our modern language if they had had that. But I don't know, I thought this was interesting, I thought it was different, I thought it was fun, I enjoyed it, I recommend it. I also recommend A Shore Thing if you're into trans stories set in this time period. A different time period, that's not Regency, because she said this was her first Regency novel, so I don't know what that other one was. Victorian, Edwardian, Georgian? Is Regency Georgian? I think it is, because the main character is Georgie, and like they call them King George. I don't know. They're all the same to me. If you want an old-timey book in the 1800s in England. What time in the 1800s? I don't know. I'm sure it makes a difference, but not to me because I don't know what I'm talking about. But I feel like Joanna Lowell knows what she's talking about. So if you do care, you can probably read these and like appreciate the differences or like the details. I can't, but I liked it anyway. So I'm just gonna stop talking. This is way longer of a video than I thought it was gonna be. I thought this was gonna be like a 10-minute video. I have once again underestimated my ability to yap. Have a nice day. Like and subscribe.